Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending where you are. This is Paul Tiambe Zeleza. Welcome to the third in our series on COVID-19 and African universities. Today we are privileged to have four presenters that will share with us their ideas about COVID-19 with particular reference to the whole issue of educational access at higher education institutions during this period. Let me introduce the four presenters. The first person is Professor Mpine Makoe, who is the Commonwealth of Learning Chair in Open Education Practices, Resources at the University of South Africa, popularly known as Unisa. She's also National Research Foundation rated research professor in open distance e-learning and the director of African Council for Distance Education. Professor Mpine has published extensively in the area of educational technology, focusing on mobile learning, staff development, quality and policy formulation in open and distance learning. She has also done consultancy work for the Commonwealth of Learning, facilitating the development of ODL policies in different universities in Africa. She holds a PhD and MSc in Educational Technology from the Open University in the United Kingdom. She also has an MA in Journalism from the University of Michigan and BA in Communication and English, cum laude from Hope College in Michigan as well, and a diploma in Journalism from Africa Literature Center in Zambia. Professor Mpine is also the president of the Distance Education Association of Southern Africa, an executive member of National Association of Distance Education Organization, and a member of the University Futures Network. She has received numerous awards for her work in developing capacity in open and distance learning. The second presenter is Professor Bonaventure Sylvain Ishengoma Rutinwa, who has been the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic of the University of Dar es Salaam since December 2017. Professor Rutinwa is Associate Professor in the Department of Private Law in the School of Law. He holds a PhD in Public International Law from University of Oxford, Master of Laws, Queen's University at Kingston in Canada, Postgraduate Bachelor of Civil Law, University of Oxford, Postgraduate Certificate in Refugee and Humanitarian Studies, also University of Oxford, and a Bachelor of Laws with honors at the University of Dar es Salaam. Before his appointment to this position, Professor Rutinwa was the Chief Corporate Counsel and Secretary to Council of the University of Dar es Salaam. He has also served as Dean, University of Dar es Salaam School of Law, between 2012 and 2015. Coordinator, International School of Law, International Migration Management Project from 2007 to date, Coordinator Center for the Study of Forced Migration between 1995 and 1997, and from 2012 to date. Professor Rutinwa is a prolific researcher in international migration law. He has researched, published, and consulted widely in the areas of public international law and migration law. He is an advocate of the High Court of Tanzania and the Court of Appeal since 1993. He has also served as a state attorney trainee in the Attorney General's Chambers, Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, before joining the University of Dar es Salaam. Our third speaker is Professor Samuel Stanley, who was selected by the Michigan State University Board of Trustees as MSU's 21st president effective August 1, 2019. Since his arrival at MSU, Dr. Stanley has moved decisively to ensure the university is a safe, respectful, and welcoming place for all. Student success and well-being, and continuing to grow MSU's extraordinary regional and global impact are his continuing top priorities. Prior to becoming MSU's 21st president, Dr. Stanley served as president of Stony Brook University in Long Island in New York. Born in Seattle, Dr. Stanley earned a Bachelor of Arts in Biological Sciences, Phi Beta Kappa, from the University of Chicago. After earning his medical degree from Harvard Medical School in 1980, he completed resident physician training at Massachusetts General Hospital, and then went to Washington University in St. Louis in 1983 for a School of Medicine fellowship in infectious diseases. There, he became a professor in the departments of both medicine and molecular microbiology in recognition of the collaborative nature of his research. A distinguished biomedical researcher, Dr. Stanley, was one of the nation's top recipients of support from the National Institutes of Health for his research focusing on enhanced defense against emerging infectious diseases. He's an expert in the biological mechanisms that cells employ when responding to infectious agents, such as parasites, bacteria, and viruses, a process known as the inflammatory response. Our final speaker is Professor Tawana Kupe. He is the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Pretoria since January 2019. He holds a BA Honours and Master's degree in English from the University of Zimbabwe and a DPhil in Media Studies from the University of Oslo, Norway. Professor Kupe is the Africa co-chair of the Australia-Africa Universities Network since 2019, and an honorary doctorate in humanities was bestowed on him by Michigan State University in December 2019. Professor Kupe has a notable publication record, having authored journal articles, books, and book chapters in his main discipline, media studies and journalism. Over the years, Professor Kupe has played a key role in the establishment of select new innovative initiatives at WITS, or Witwatersrand University, of which the latest in 2018 was the Africa Center for the Study of the United States. He's an active member of several civil society organizations, including the Amabungane Center for Investigative Journalism, and is chairman of the Board of Media Monitoring Africa since 2005. He has been a judge and convener of multiple major journalism awards in South Africa. He's also the co-chairperson of the Kifra Prize Selections Committee and member of the Kifra Prize Board of Governors, coordinated by the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences in Rwanda from 2020. He also serves on the board of a major private company and is a member of the International Association of Media and Communication Research. So we are very privileged, as I said, today to be led in our discussion about the impact of COVID-19, specifically on issues of enrollment. Let me just make a few remarks with regards to the challenge of COVID-19, both in general, but specifically when it comes to educational access. Generally, of course, the challenges facing national governments, international and intergovernmental agencies, and institutions, including those in higher education, is threefold. First, slowing and stopping the spread of the pandemic. Second, how best to mitigate the extensive and damaging effects of the pandemic in the immediate and short term. Third, how to ensure survival and growth after the pandemic. The impact of the COVID-19 in terms of educational access can also be seen in three major ways. First of all, the whole question of institutional capacities to manage the crisis. And here, the question is, how do you remote in terms of electronic infrastructures, e-learning resources, faculty and student preparedness, and faculty and student access to the necessary devices and the internet. Secondly, with regards to whenever the crisis comes to an end or schools and colleges are allowed to reopen, what is the level of preparedness for continued mitigation efforts in terms of social distancing and other health measures? With regards to the second aspect, namely student recruitment and enrollments, there are three major areas that one could also look at. And the first one is, of course, recruitment and enrollments of domestic students. The domestic market for students is facing severe challenges in many countries for a number of reasons. One, COVID-19 is devastating national and local economies, which is eroding the capacity of governments to support higher education institutions and families to pay student tuition, especially among students from poorer backgrounds. Secondly, how can universities better leverage government, philanthropic, private sector support, and institutional aid specifically for needy students? Third, in many countries, high school and university entry examinations have been postponed, which has affected the pipeline of available students. What are the solutions? And then secondly, the whole issue of international students. Universities that depend on international students have seen that market dry up. What kind of creative strategies can they develop to recruit and keep such students? A recent article in the Chronicle of Higher Education notes some of the following. One, that some institutions have sought to find overseas partners where their students could enroll on a temporary basis. Two, some are focusing on how to make online course delivery work better for overseas students by designing courses with synchronous and asynchronous elements. Three, some are working to develop a sense of community, such as organizing alumni groups for networking and support for students who may need to spend the fall semester overseas. And then the question that arises for me is four, is there an opportunity for Africa by closing the gap between outbound and inbound international students? According to UNESCO data, Africa accounted for 10.35% of outbound students, of whom there were 5.3 million in 2017, and only 4.26% of inbound students. Can some of those students from Africa who are planning to go abroad study in our universities? The third issue is ensuring quality and equity. One, training faculty and students for optimal use of online teaching and learning. Two, there is need to implement multiple remote learning platforms that optimize reach and equity and promote targeted outreach to disadvantaged groups. Three, adapting curricula. Adapting curricula to enhance feasibility and effectiveness of remote learning. Much of what we've been doing is emergency teaching and learning using online platforms. How do you combine that with online courses? And then, of course, the final issue is integrity of assessments and examinations. With those introductory remarks, I'd like to invite speaker to share 10 minutes her views on the whole issue of COVID-19 and teaching and learning for students. Professor Makoe, of course, is at Africa's leading institution when it comes to teaching and learning using distance and online platforms. Professor Makoe, it's your turn to speak for 10 minutes, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zeleza, for giving me this opportunity, and I want to thank the committee that gave me the opportunity to participate in this Alliance for African Partnership webinar today. And I hope that it will all go well, and our dialogue, and I'm glad that we're beginning this dialogue because it's an important component of what the education system should look like. And we all know that post-COVID, things will not be the same as much as they are not the same now. Nothing has ever disrupted the education system or the social system, the political system, and all systems that we are familiar with as human beings, like COVID-19 has done. So we need to also have the dialogue that opens up these discussions on how we deal with it. I think maybe my starting point is the principles that are guiding my way of doing things and my personal view of what education is. I believe, and these are the views that the UNESCO and other bigger communities talk about, is that education is a fundamental human right. And we all know that without education, many people are unable to reach their potential in whatever way that they can do. then also, secondly, education is a public good. It is not a commodity. It is something that all of us need to have access to. Thirdly, education ensures equitable access to life opportunities. And many of us who come from developing countries, where there is a big chunk of the population that are illiterate, or they have not had higher education access, there is issues about the opportunities, life opportunities that they have. The third thing, the other thing is that I come from the University of South Africa, as everybody has said, and we call it Unisa. It's one of the oldest universities, and maybe in developing context is not one of the oldest, but in our developing context, in a developed context like in the North, it's not one of the oldest, but in our context is certainly the oldest in the continent. It was founded in 1873. It was founded as an examining body for universities in the UK during the colonial era. And then in 1936, it became a dedicated distance teaching university. Hence, it's the grandmother of all distance teaching universities, because it started in 1926 as the only dedicated distance teaching university, not supporting other universities. And on top of that, it is one of the universities where many universities in South Africa came from. And it's the largest in the continent, with more than 400,000 students. It has a very illustrious alumni, and that include 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners. One of the winners, who is Nelson Mandela, our former president, got his degree while still in prison. And access issues starts from there with us. The central point is that people now, he was in his own lockdown when he got his degree. And this shows that it is possible, that you can be in a lockdown and still be able to learn. And Unisa has proven that even people who are away from the institution, who are learning at a distance, they can still get the qualification that they desire for their life opportunities. And virtually many people in Africa, and also in South Africa in particular, graduated from Unisa. Another Nobel Peace Prize winner is Reverend Desmond Tutu, who also come from the university. So many people, even during the dark days of apartheid, where education, where universities were divided up against race, according to races, Unisa was open to people with disabilities, to people from marginalized communities, to people who are in prison, to all people. So it had enabled access to education. And it has enabled access because it's an open distance learning university, and it has enabled inclusivity, flexibility, where you can study wherever you are, anytime you want. And in that way, it addressed equitable issues and also enabled lifelong learning. People who are already working, they can come back and study. And I'm bringing these points there because this is what we may be thinking about when we think about higher education in the future. Now, the biggest question now is, why are we concerned about education access in an era of COVID-19, which is the topic of today? We are concerned because COVID-19 has forced many people to stay at home. And we have 1.6 billion children and youth who are forced to stay at home because of social distances. And therefore there are losses in learning, and in other contexts, there's an increased dropout rate that's likely to happen. And this also, the Millennium Development Goals are going to be reversed because of this. So there had also been a lot of stopgap solutions, and so far, the stopgap solution that has happened in this past month, it's about the online delivery. And online delivery have been used, and as online delivery is being used, then the other issue of the challenge of the digital divide came along, because many people are excluded from participation as well, especially in developing contexts that we live in. However, things have to be done. Now, how do we deal with the crisis in relation to the educational institution's mission? And we know that the mission of universities is teaching and learning and research and community engagement. All those things, they need people to interact, they need people to be together, they need people to do things in a group or in a face-to-face setting. And now we find ourselves having to deal with issues of social distancing. And one of the issues now in the crisis stage that we find ourselves in is survival. How do we ensure that learning continue even during this difficult time? And we know that learning should continue irrespective of what is happening. The second point is that as much as we want learning to continue, there are certain things that we are not familiar with. Face-to-face, it's even worse, but in distance, because we have been teaching at a distance, we have been teaching students who are sitting at home and in a different environment. For us, it's another area altogether, but for a majority of higher education institutions that are used to teaching face-to-face and they're taking their courses online environment, it's very important for them to be skilled with the necessary skills and competencies to do so. Online learning as well, it requires structure, systems, and resources to support it. And these are completely different from face-to-face systems that we are used to. And as we are planning for the crisis stage and we're trying to respond as things happen in this crisis space, we need to begin to plan for the recovery phase, as Professor Kupe was talking about. And not only recovery space, but repurposing the whole education system for the future. Because unless we do that, we won't be able to move forward with what we want to do. I frame my research on the issue of the social justice, because I believe strongly that unless education addresses the social justice mandate, we won't be able to move forward as well as we want to. And this area, this period, also it's trying to question the way we have been doing things. First of all, there are lots of justices, and I'm going to pull on Fraser's framework that he has used at looking at justices, and Hodgkinson, Williams, and Trotter also looked at these social justice principles that guide the education system, and also what is the social justice mandate of education. And I added the openness, because that's my role as an open education scholar. There are economic justice. We know that many people may not be able to get education because of the cost, because of other things. And these are in terms of the principles, is how education is distributed to whom and to where. When we talk about access, it's not only about opening doors, as we have learned. It also deals with economic, cultural, political, and digital issues as well. The cultural issue in South Africa, we had strikes by our students, actually reminded that they cannot recognize themselves within the curriculum that we inherited from the colonizers, we inherited from the West. And how do we make education inclusive? How do we make education, people look at education and they can see themselves within the education sector? And how does it represent even the person at the bottom? How is it equitable in terms of representation? And the other part that I've added in these justices, and that came through during this period, is the digital justice. We all know that we are participating in this platform today because we are all connected. And unless we get connected, all of us are connected, equitable inclusivity and accessibility will never happen. And as we were dealing with this issue, we started a little project amongst ourselves when we saw that many people are moving to an online space. However, they don't know how to teach in an online space. So we started with that process, and then we invited out of school teachers, teachers who are not at the university at the time, because we lose them. And we brought in the lifelong learning principles into this project that we are working on. It's a pilot project. It started on the 4th of March, and we invited them, and word of mouth, and about 300 responded. There were more than 300 who responded, and now we are dealing with them as they come along. And what we did is we just went and looked for open education resources that are available. And we advertise this course as a free course because it's based on the open education resources. And we use the resources that teaches them how to use online learning space for teaching purposes. And then we brought in the mobile learning because many of our students have access to mobile learning. And we used WhatsApp, the platform that they are familiar with. And in that platform, we added peer support in the platform where they formed their own study groups. We allocated them study groups and they work together as they help each other navigate their way through this online space. And some of them have received certificates, and it's a fun way of doing it. It's a very short program, but the idea is to introduce them to the concept of what online learning means and how different it is in a distance education, in teaching and learning. And we make sure that we include issues of accessibility, inclusivity, equity, and connectivity. Again, it's those that are connected and those that have money to buy data, that have money to buy data that can be able to participate in higher education. Hence, there is a need for our government to ensure that connectivity it's happening and it's everywhere. The slide that I want to show you, that when we start things and we do one size fits all, as education system, especially higher education system, has been over the years, we are leaving out people who didn't have access in the past. So equitable access means that you bring up the one that has been at the bottom to bring them to the level at which they can compete at the same level. And I know that competition has been part of learning, especially in higher education. But maybe this part, we need to rethink about how do we leave behind a whole group of people while we are going forward with just a few people as we go along. So access for me, it's not only opening doors or enabling people to come in, it's ensuring that quality and equitable, it's also equitable. And maybe lastly, we need to rethink education beyond COVID-19. We should strive for an education system that is inclusive, equitable, accessible, and that enables parity of participation to achieve the education we want, especially in developing countries where we have a backlog of development. And unless education is equitable, there is no way that we will be able to achieve. So as we are rethinking education beyond COVID-19, colleagues, I think we need to come to an understanding that whatever that we're thinking, it should not exclusive. With those few words, thank you very much for participation in this webinar.
Thank you. Professor Makoe shared with us the various aspects of issues that we should, when it comes to COVID-19, and some of the issues that she shared with us, she started by noting some of the critical principles that UNESCO and all of us in education need to be concerned about, that education is a fundamental human right, as well as, of course, a public good. And therefore, the issue of equitable access becomes paramount. Then she shared with us very briefly the history of Unisa, which is very illustrious, founded in 1873, and she called it rightly the grandmother of distance education on our continent, and one of the oldest in the world, with 400,000 students and such illustrious alumni as the late President Nelson Mandela, and of course Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And she then talked to us about the impact that COVID-19 is having in terms of the number of young people who have had to stay at home, 1.6 billion, and that it has exacerbated challenges of exclusion. And then she went on to talk to us about how to deal with COVID-19, that of course learning has to continue, and that of course some institutions have transitioned from face-to-face, which is the familiar way of teaching and learning, to using distance and online platforms, and that this requires structures and systems to support such ways of teaching and learning, and that we need to start planning also for the recovery phase, and ask ourselves what I think is a fundamental question: what is the purpose of higher education? What is the purpose of education? In other words, we need to start thinking about repurposing higher education. And in doing that, we need to underscore the importance of the social justice mandate of education, including open education. And that, of course, touches on economic justice, cultural justice, political justice, and digital justice. And she shared with us a project that she's been involved in, working with teachers and using all sorts of platforms, including WhatsApp, as a way of familiarizing the teachers with online and remote teaching and learning. And she underscored the importance of governments to provide connectivity and above all to ensure that access is tied to quality. And the whole question of beyond COVID-19, the issues of inclusivity, equitability, and accessibility, that those should be uppermost in our minds as we think of the post-COVID era. Underscoring all this, of course, is the whole question: what is the purpose of education? What are we trying to achieve? And in trying to achieve that, we need to focus on these fundamental principles. So once again, Professor Makoe, thank you very much for that illuminating presentation. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions and comments after we have completed the first part of our webinar. The second presenter was supposed to be Professor Rutinwa from the University of Dar es Salaam. Unfortunately, we just learned that he's not able to join us. So I'll proceed to ask President Stanley, President of MSU, to address us for the next 10 minutes. President Stanley, please.
So thank you, Professor Zeleza, and thank you for AAP for inviting me to participate today. It's really an absolute pleasure to be here with my colleagues and have a chance to talk about something that's extraordinarily as important as COVID-19. I think you're aware of Michigan State University. We're one of the leading public research universities in the United States, a member of the Association of American Universities. Those are the 65 best research universities in the country. We're about 50,000 students, and we're global in our outreach, and we're very proud of the fact that we're a global university. I had been watching as an infectious disease specialist. This was my research background. What I devoted, a large part of my career to was dealing with the challenge of emerging infectious diseases. So when reports came out of China of a new coronavirus outbreak, this would be the third now world outbreak of coronavirus potentially that we were seeing. The first being the SARS coronavirus, the second being a virus called MERS, which has had a number of outbreaks around the world. I followed it with interest, and my thinking was it would behave very much like the previous two coronaviruses did. And both of those were very severe diseases, but they could be controlled by very standard public health measures. You were able to isolate, identify cases, isolate people who were infected, and stop the chain of transmission, and thereby stop the disease. And I really thought the same thing would happen in Wuhan, China, that outbreak would be contained, that there might be some international foci that would take place because of travel, but those would be contained within countries as well. That's very much what happened with the SARS outbreak, and I thought the same would happen with COVID-19. That would have been my prediction. But as I watched what was happening in Wuhan, the number of cases grow, it became clear to me that this was a much more contagious disease than those previous coronaviruses were. And there was much more likelihood this could lead to a worldwide pandemic. And then, of course, as I watched the disease spread out of China, begin to affect Europe, and of course, eventually come to the United States, I realized we were dealing with something that we haven't really seen around the world in decades. The most severe previous epidemic we saw as a world was the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, which of course created an epidemic in the 80s that we're still dealing with. But this is by far the most severe disease we've seen since that time. And the impact, as my colleagues have said, has been extraordinary on the world. I don't think I could have predicted that the United States would lead the world in the number of cases, by far lead the world in the number of deaths. We are about to pass 100,000 deaths in the United States. Probably today we will pass that milestone. So the impact again on our country has been extraordinary. The impact on our economy has been extraordinary as well. So from the point of view of Michigan State University, as I said, I've been watching what was happening in Wuhan. In February, I appointed a task force to begin planning for contingencies that we might see. We talked about the possibility of moving to online learning. The University of Washington in Seattle, Seattle was one of the earliest places where the outbreak took place in the United States. Seattle had made this move to online learning very early on, and we modeled what we were going to do potentially after that. And when the first cases appeared in the state of Michigan, 2 cases were reported in the state of Michigan. Even though they were both from travelers, I still had concerns that there could already have been transmission within the community. So we made the decision to go to completely online learning at that point in time. And that was before other campuses did, but most followed very quickly after we did this in Michigan. That was on March 11th. And within 2 days, we were teaching everybody online or remotely. And that was an amazing accomplishment. And I have to just again congratulate the faculty and staff at Michigan State University for the work they did in that transition. We continued to host some students on campus. So most of the students then left campus and returned to their families. We continued to host about 2,000 students on campus, including our international students who weren't able to return home, of course, during this time. But we basically then also sent all of our workers pretty much home as well. So about 88% of the people who work on campus returned to their homes as well. And in Michigan, we're still on a stay-home order. So we're in the last days, we believe, probably another 2 weeks of a stay-home order where people are encouraged to stay home. You don't go to work if you can work remotely, and only essential people can leave their houses to go to work. People can leave to purchase groceries and things like that, but that's the order for the state. So we completed our semester through that. We got through our final exams. We did a virtual commencement for our students. And it was a sea change, and yet everybody responded well. I wouldn't say that it's gone perfectly. I wouldn't say that there haven't been challenges, and certainly students, for some of our students, and we've talked about these issues around disparities, there were real differences in their ability to access courses because of their ability for Wi-Fi in their homes, differences in not having laptops and things like that. We've tried to ameliorate some of those issues by providing some of these things for our students. And we've also had some major financial aid programs for students to help as well, which we can talk about more later. But we've also encouraged more online learning over the summer. We've actually created more online courses this summer for students in summer than we ever had before. And we've been training our faculty to get prepared again for this switch to more online learning in the future. So we're educating about 350 of our faculty this summer on how to teach better and more effectively online. We also are continuing and trying to restart now our very important research mission. Some of that was stopped when we went to the remote learning, as well as people working from home. So a lot of our research had to stop. But we're beginning to start it back again. We did have an exception that was made for any research related to COVID-19. So we've now developed 50 new research projects on our campus devoted to COVID-19 in response to the demand from the country, of course, for better therapies, for better diagnostic tools, and for better personal protection equipment for people who are dealing with. And all of these things are things the university has been dealing with. And I think we've probably never and maybe been more helpful to the state of Michigan than we've been in this particular crisis in terms of the need and what a research university can do to move things forward. We've also done these collaborations worldwide as well. So we've actually been working with universities in Africa, in Uganda, in Senegal, and Botswana for respirator developments, ventilators, mechanical ventilators. We had work going on our campus. We learned through AAP that the other universities had work going on as well to develop mechanical ventilators. These are very important, of course, in trying to get people through the acute phase of the coronavirus infection. And we've developed ways that you can produce a ventilator with really commonly available parts, relatively inexpensively. And so we're doing that kind of collaboration. And I think that's a great example of how AAP has brought researchers together to begin discussions on how they might actually do something that can make a difference in countries. One of the things we're spending a lot of time on currently is planning for the fall semester. What we're going to do then, we are looking at ways in which we could safely open. The work that we've done in terms of everybody sheltering in place in Michigan has done great work in controlling the spread of the epidemic. One of the terms we use in epidemiology to talk about spread, I'm sure you've heard this term, is the R naught. It means how many people does one person with COVID-19 have the opportunity to infect. If it's higher than 1, it means the epidemic continues. If it's lower than 1, you have a chance to stop the epidemic. The R naught in the state of Michigan has been under 1, about 0.8 or so for the past 2 weeks. That means we have the opportunity to really slow the epidemic down. We won't completely be able to stop it. We still are going to have new cases, I'm sure, introduced into the area by people coming into the state of Michigan. And there still is some transmission taking place in the community as well. But we've dampened it down tremendously. And that gives us the opportunity, we think, to start bringing people back for campus. We have a number of things we have to do that. One of those is the wearing of masks. We anticipate that everybody on campus will be wearing a mask when they return. That's indoors or outdoors. You'll be wearing a mask when you're on campus. When you're in your own office, if you have a solo office, when your own dormitory room, you'll be able to take your mask off. But the rest of the time, we expect people to be wearing masks. The most vulnerable population on our campus are our faculty and staff, because they're the older folks. So about 1/3 of our faculty are over the age of 50 at Michigan State University, which puts them in a higher risk group, as you know, for dealing with coronavirus infection. So we have to make sure they're protected. We're doing ways in classrooms to provide protections. We'll probably do some classes outside. That's a way to help this, and where the climates are good, that's something you can do that I think is a very effective way to mitigate risk, is doing more things outside. We will be trying to keep people 6 feet apart. Social distancing, we call it. Really, the better term for it is physical distancing to make this safer. And we, again, will be doing hybrid classes, as well as a lot of classes purely online again. For these very large classes we had at Michigan State University, where we had 500 people in a class, that's no longer practical to do, to have people side by side. Even with masks, the risk is too high to stay in there for hours. So we will be cutting those classes down in size, having sections of them that can be face-to-face, but the lectures themselves will be delivered online, hopefully asynchronously or remotely if that's what we have to do. But that's one way in which, again, we plan to reduce the risk when people return. We're also looking at adjusting our academic calendar, shorten the semester to some degree, and have a stop point where we will move to purely online for the last 3 weeks of the semester. That's something we're looking at doing as well. I haven't communicated all of this to the university, so you're the first to hear some of these things, but this is the work we're doing to see what we can do to open in the fall. We think it's important to do this. Michigan State University has continued to operate through the Civil War, through the 1918 flu outbreak. We continue to have classes. We want to continue that tradition of continuing to serve our students. Again, we know for some of our economically disadvantaged students, this has been a huge challenge, and they may be going home to situations that are less conducive to their learning than they would be on campus. So we want to preserve that option for them to remain on campus, where they have access to Wi-Fi and where they have the social interactions that are so important for students as well. The other thing we're working really on is the quality of what we do. Again, I talked about, we have people who are training more, the quality of the online learning we provide. I think that's been something we want to work on. And I think, you know, as we will talk about, I'm sure, in our discussion, this is going to change higher education. We had a group of faculty who never considered teaching remotely, or certainly teaching online. And we basically, instead of dipping their toe in the water, they've had to jump right into the pool because they had to do this. And I think they've learned a lot of how to do it. And I think it's going to make them more amenable to doing it in the future. So I think all of us share a number of challenges, but I think we also share a number of opportunities. And though our contexts may differ from the US, in Kenya, South Africa, or Tanzania, the coronavirus pandemic has highlighted that we're globally interconnected. I don't think fewer things have highlighted this is a worldwide problem. And many of the solutions we have in the US may work in your universities, and many of the solutions you have may work for us as well. So the better we share information, the more important it is. So the shared challenges, I think, again, and my colleagues have talked about it, the challenges of remote and online education, ensuring we have the infrastructure, the quality learning can take place, adapting new ways to teach and making sure our faculty are well prepared. And as I mentioned before, addressing these issues around inequality and access for students that arise. Maybe we hadn't anticipated as much, but they clearly arise when we try and deliver this way. The pandemic in the US, as I've mentioned, has had very disparate effects on populations. It has hit our African American and healthcare underserved community with much more serious effect. Just one statistic, Blacks represent about 14% of the population of Michigan. 40% of the deaths from coronavirus in Michigan took place among the Black population, among people of color. So this is a terrible thing. It points out problems with healthcare in the United States, with poverty in the United States. But again, we also see it reflected in education, and our students who come from these neighborhoods have not only had the disruption that the coronavirus caused to their education, but also seen their families disrupted and devastated by this outbreak, and our sensitivity to that is very important. The financial consequences of the pandemic are extraordinary in the United States. For Michigan State University, just to give you an example, we have a $60 million loss for this fiscal year, but the next fiscal year, which starting in July, we estimate we may have between $150 and $300 million reduction in our revenue. And some of that is related to international students. We've seen a significant decline, as you might imagine, in international students. They can't get visas to come to the United States. They may have concerns about the epidemic in the United States, and that reduction in tuition is significant for us. So we're working very hard to respond to this. We're working very hard to respond to the financial need of our students, whose families their parents may become unemployed now, and we're working through both government and institutional funds. We've frozen our tuition and room and board rates for the coming year, so there's no increase in cost for our students. And again, we're working to think critically and plan, and to think about what we do next going forward, and how we do what we can to continue our core missions of education, research, and the extension outreach that's so important to Michigan State as a land-grant university. So again, I look forward to working with you. I look forward to the discussion that comes forward, and I thank you for the opportunity to present to you today, and I'll stop here.
For all of us. He shared with us a bit about MSU being one of the leading public research universities in the United States, a member of the Association of American Universities, a group of just a little over 60 universities. And he also shared with us the global reach of Michigan and its commitment to international education. And he shared with us a particular understanding that he has as somebody who is an infectious disease specialist, and that he had been watching this, like many of us, assuming it would have the kind of limited impact that SARS and MERS had, that it could be controlled. Of course, only to realize that it was not that easy. And as it spread to China and Europe, it became evident that this was a serious global pandemic. And of course, he shared with us data that is becoming available to many of us, that the US now is leading the world in the number of cases and deaths, and the impact that this has had on the country has been quite devastating. Going to Michigan State's own responses, he noted that, like many of us, he formed a task force in February, and that they were able to move to online learning 2 days after the university had been closed. They followed the model of University of Washington, where the pandemic had started, and they were able to teach everyone remotely. However, some students continue to be on campus, about 2,000, many of them international students, but also some local students, and about 88% of the employees were sent home. They were able to complete the semester and then also conduct a virtual commencement. Again, something that is happening in many of our institutions. He noted some of the challenges that they faced, again, challenges that we are all facing in terms of disparities, particularly for economically disadvantaged students with regards to access to laptops, Wi-Fi, and of course the whole issue of financial aid that the university has been paying particular attention to assisting those students. And that more online courses are being developed for the summer, and a number of faculty, 350, being trained to upscale and improve their online courses and delivery. And that the university is planning to restart its research mission. I was quite impressed to hear about the number of research projects that are being developed, 50 are devoted to COVID-19. And that, of course, the university is keen to ensure that its contribution to society, to the state of Michigan, and more generally through these research projects becomes more and more evident. And then, of course, he noted there are global collaborations, which many of us who've been attending the series will have heard prior, in Senegal, in Botswana, Rwanda, and he noted some of those areas, including the production of ventilators. Finally, he shared with us some of the plans for the fall semester, how they can reopen safely. And this is an issue all of us, I think, are looking at, wearing of masks on campus and paying attention to the most vulnerable populations on our campuses, faculty and staff over 50, and that requires rethinking the use of classroom space and maybe even using more outside spaces and adjusting the academic calendar. And he emphasized the importance of maintaining quality of online education. And he noted that higher education will be quite different after this crisis than it was before. I think all of us would share with him the need for us to meet the challenges, but also seize the opportunities, and that we are all globally interconnected. We need to share information. And in dealing with this crisis, the issues of infrastructure, new ways of teaching and learning, and addressing inequalities and disparities become extremely important. He touched on the whole question of the financial consequences, which again is something all of us are thinking about, and many of us spend sleepless nights on that. The losses in terms of revenue, 60 million, he noted for the semester that just ended, and for the future, somewhere between 150 to 300 million. So once again, I want to thank President Stanley for sharing the experiences of Michigan State, and I think all of us can agree that we're in the boat together. We can learn from each other. What we need to do is to continue sharing some of these experiences. We'll now go to our last speaker, Professor Tawana Kupe from the University of Pretoria, where he's Vice Chancellor and Principal. Professor Kupe. I think you're muted. If you can, yeah, you're muted. Yeah, okay.
Okay, sorry about that, yeah. So good afternoon, moderator, and good afternoon, my fellow panelists and everybody who's listening today. Allow me first to thank both President Stanley and the AAP, which is anchored both in Africa and Malawi with Prof. Kandawire and with Jose and Amy at Michigan State. What most people do not realize is that Michigan University has been in Africa for 65 years. And so the AEP, if you like, is the latest iteration of its very strong collaborative and partnerships initiatives with the rest of the continent. In the university where I did my undergraduate, Michigan University was instrumental in creating a faculty of agriculture in the 1980s that did not exist before. That's very important because one of the key issues, which is not for discussing today, which COVID has impacted on, it has highlighted food and nutrition insecurity in Africa. And that's very, very vital for the continent's progress. Students who are hungry and children who are hungry cannot perform well, even if you give them educational access. And so Michigan has walked the continent's sustainable development route for 6 or more decades, and it will continue to do so. I now encounter Michigan University again when I'm now in my 50s as an honorary graduate of the university. Thank you again. And in the partnership. So I think Michigan Support for Africa is testimony to the belief I have that knowledge knows no borders, just like viruses, as President Stanley said, no borders, and can affect each nation, each society, each individual equally. So what is going to take us forward is actually stronger collaborations, stronger partnerships, sharing knowledges, and reshaping the higher education system together. I think I might not take all of my 10 minutes because my colleagues have covered some of it, but also for discussing. But let me start off by saying that I think the future of higher education is hybrid. And I say so partly because my university is very much, although on the face of it, a contact university, is very much a university that follows a hybrid teaching and learning model. And it has done so or developed this model for the last 21 years or 2 decades. So we've been relatively better prepared, if you like. No one could be completely prepared for this pandemic and this crisis. I must add also that the University of Pretoria had, when the universities in South Africa rather had a crisis in 2015, 2016 called the Fees Must Fall protest, they had to resort to something similar to what we do, but not on this scale. The University of Pretoria then decided that it would invest more, both philosophically, in online teaching as a hybrid model. That means a combination of online as well as contact teaching. We also, as recently as last year when I joined the university, invested just under $10 million in upgrading our IT infrastructure. And that was a very wise move, although we didn't know about that there will be a virus in 2020, because it has enabled us to create something called the UP Connect portal. This portal is very unique because on the African continent, here are the challenges for online teaching. Access to the necessary IT infrastructure and learning management systems. The data necessary for students to access those learning management systems for online teaching and learning. Of course, the training of the students and the training of the faculty or the academic staff, something I will mention shortly, which we are strong on. So UP Connect portal enabled us to do the following. It enabled us actually to aggregate all of the teaching resources behind a portal. That when students and staff connected through it, they did not need data. And so zero rating of data became very, very important. Not many universities in our parts of the world could actually do that. We discovered also quite recently, because we only started resuming our first semester on the 4th of May, that when it comes to when many people are online or people are doing tests and assessments, the system can be slow or throw you out because of the sheer number of people in. That we needed to complement it with data packages. So we've just sent data packages to about 15,000 students who requested them. Some didn't need it. So we sent data packages, 20 gigabytes, which they can use during daytime and nighttime, but also only dedicated to tests, examinations, and other activities. They can, for normal learning, they use our teaching and learning management system, which is called ClickUp. It is actually Blackboard Collaborate. On Blackboard Collaborate, we have a range of tools. We can do assessments, we can do online tutoring, we can do live synchronous teaching. So let me give you some stats. On the 5th of May, when we resumed teaching, there were 26,304 students in 444 live synchronous sessions of people taking classes with them. And in this learning management system, we have all sorts of interactive capabilities. And that enhances, if you like, our hybrid philosophy. And if you drive around our campus, you will see at various gates, notices written, adopt hybrid teaching and learning. Because in a sense, if you like, we're prescient, or we believe that also just in general, even technological changes, education was moving into more digital and online platforms. People forget something during this pandemic, that we were being disrupted by changes in technology anyway, as a higher education model based on contact teaching. COVID actually simply has compounded or exacerbated the disruption that was already happening, but not at this pace. So if you like, that is why I say that I think we should begin to now talk about what is the future going to look like. I think the future is going to look like hybrid teaching and learning as we do it at the University of Pretoria, but pivoting more towards online teaching, complemented by strong contact teaching. I think this has huge implications for how you structure higher education. So you might find that indeed some programs and others might well be done by students who don't necessarily have to come to college and be physical residents in contact all the time, but some of the time. because we don't have time, I think that we might have to copy some of what is used in business education, like MBAs, part-time MBAs, where people, are at work, they're full-time working, but they come for contact sessions periodically, and then go back up and continue learning, but continue to learn online. So this will not, they can't be a one-size-fits-all model. This model might fit certain disciplines, certain fields, certain interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary areas more than others. But as this technology develops as well, you might find. But I just want to be clear, I'm not one of those who believe everything will move totally online. There is a space, and it is important to have contact teaching. Education is not simply interacting through technologies. Education is also a social activity, actually. It has a socializing effect. It has a connective effect. It binds humanity, and also the exchange, face-to-face, augmented, complemented by online teaching is very, very important. And then University of Pretoria, you asked at the beginning, Moderator, Prof. Zeleza, what about access issues? We all live in unequal societies, and more so in the African continent, and including in South Africa, where we are the world's most unequal society, if you like. So one of the things despite the fact that we very much believe in hybrid teaching and learning, one of the things that faced us when the pandemic hit us was if we went online, what would happen to equal access or equitability of access? Quite a lot of our students have devices, in part because of this philosophy, and can buy them from their scholarships and bursaries or from family income or own income. But a substantial percentage did not have. So we adopted the principle, no student should be left behind. So despite the fact that we started on the 1st of May, but initially we thought we would start on the 20th of April. We stopped. We said we won't start the 20th of April in order to actually address equality of access through the technology. So this is what we did. We decided to repurpose some of our budgets and buy laptops for all the students who could not afford to buy a laptop for themselves. As I speak right today, we've distributed about just over 2,000 laptops. We have some left in our bank, and interestingly, some students returned the laptops because they then decided, well, perhaps they didn't need one. Because it's also a loan scheme, because we want it to be a sustainable system. You loan the laptop, when you complete, you return the laptop if you like. We make sure also we buy computers that are a little bit more high-end than would be normal, because we wanted that durability and that sustainability given limited resources. We also created an internal solidarity fund where people donate. So I donate some of my own earnings, if you like, into the solidarity fund, and also staff can do that as well. We then actually use some analytics and a market research company to identify those students who needed one, and for the others to actually tell us if they actually needed one. So we also approached some philanthropists, and some philanthropists and companies approached us. Aspen Pharmacare gave us 600 devices. A philanthropist that I work with that I know gave us a significant amount, 300 million rand, to actually buy computers and laptops, and various other people have made similar kinds of donations. And remember that with the data deals, with the zero-rated data platform, UP Connect, made sure that everybody who could. Still, we live in an unequal society where some areas are more developed than others. Or put another way, connectivity is not what it should be across South Africa and across the African continent, as you know. So what we're doing with those students is that we are sending them hard copy materials, drives, and other things. And also we're going to do telephone tutoring with them and other forms of support. We had right at the beginning of the pandemic also allowed students who come from families where conditions are not easy to study to stay behind at the university under appropriate social, physical distancing regulations and so on. So about 200 or so stayed. We are right now working with under the new conditions for relaxing lockdown to try and bring those students back, and to try and bring also, we also allowed some of our international students to stay, by the way, and they stayed. Some left the country and went to their countries, and we want some of them back. On our learning management system, ClickUp, we've noticed that students from 20 countries across the world, all the way to the US, are connecting to our platform and also participating in teaching and learning. So if you like, what we've tried to do is to say that both in terms of technological access, access to teaching and learning, we try and ensure that we do not exclude everybody. But as you can tell, it's not so easy, and it's not always dependent on what we can do. You also ask questions about assessment. Our learning and management system is sophisticated enough to actually manage a range of forms of assessments, including video assessments. And we're going to use that in place of the traditional physical exams as far as possible. And so we're not going to rely on sit-down paper exams. And this is also possible for a number of reasons. Even before the pandemic, in 2019, 96% of our undergraduate modules had a substantive online presence and could be taught online, although we are a contact university. So we have a philosophy which goes something like this in teaching. You must, as a student, you must engage, you must prepare and engage in class and consolidate afterwards. All of those three stages are underpinned by an online activity. So your preparation for class also is online exercises on our learning management system. In class, the professor or the academic might use online resources, videos, other interactive resources, open educational resources, as Prof. Makoe also referred to. And also after class, you are expected also to continue online and interact and also consolidate your knowledge. In this current phase, if you can't attend live sessions, everything is recorded. So you can download and actually follow the class on your own, as well as interact on the learning management system with ourselves. I believe that just generally, COVID is, I think, is requiring of us to, as far as resources are available, because you can't be glib about this, as far as resources are available, for us to move to change the equation, where online becomes much more a key element, and you pivot in that direction, but you do not jettison contact because it has its own particular educational value, if you like. And so therefore, what is required in this space, apart from international collaborations, so AAPs, us working with the Michigan State, is what open educational resources can we develop together? What common courses can we develop together that are online? What things can we begin to teach together online? And despite the time differences, we can. Might be like today, they had to wake up much earlier than we did, but we could actually manage that. Second, I think in the African context, another partnership is needed with educational institutions, governments, private sector, international development partners to build the infrastructure of the internet and to make universities that might not be relative, and this is only relatives, that might not at this point have the resources my university has, to also have similar kinds of resources. Because I think another principle that's important in this space is it's not just no student left behind, it's no institution left behind. In South Africa, we have a system of 26 public universities, and all are not equally resourced. They reflect the histories of our country and the discriminatory landscape that is inscribed on the educational landscape, and also trajectories post-1994. But what you want to do is actually you want a higher education system that moves in tandem, that ensures equitability and equal access as generally the same level of resources. And so a collaboration within South African and African universities, working with the international partners like Michigan, would help us actually, if you like, weather the past. So let me perhaps end here by saying that there's a lot I could say about what we do at UP, but I wanted to say something also that I believe in. There's a lot of talk these days about, well, the new normal. I think that the new normal will not come into being simply because there was a pandemic. The new normal needs academic institutions to become active agents of change and to tackle the challenges and to take advantage of the opportunities that are. So for a university like ours, although we're going in that direction, perhaps not as fast as we could, despite that way the resources, this is forcing us actually, in a sense, to take the opportunity to move much more firmly, but actually to drive that through an educational philosophy. and not to be driven by the technology itself. Because education, with the technology, you could do a lot, including a lot of damage. But I think you could take advantage of the technology to advance genuine academic goals, build an inclusive society, provide knowledge that empowers, that knowledge empowering people to transform their own lives, to transform communities, to transform sectors in society, to transform societies, and also to transform the world. So I'd like to stop there.
Kupe, this was again a wonderful sharing of your experiences at University of Pretoria and some key lessons that you have learned and that we can all benefit from knowing. You started by sharing with us your appreciation for MSU and AAP, the Alliance for African Partnership, that is hosting this series. And you noted correctly that MSU has been on the continent for about 65 years, and that the Faculty of Agriculture at your undergraduate alma mater, University of Zimbabwe, was actually partly started with the experience of MSU being brought to bear, and that you got an honorary doctorate at MSU later on in your life, simply underscoring the relationship that you have had personally, but more importantly, that our institutions have had with MSU. And you noted correctly again that knowledge, like viruses, know no borders, and therefore it is imperative for all of us to collaborate. And you spent considerable time sharing with us your thoughts on the future of higher education. And you noted correctly that that future is going to be a hybrid future. And you shared with us the experiences of University of Pretoria, that you have tried to, in fact, work on this future, not only because of COVID-19, that you started this, in fact, before, in which the Fees Must Fall movement helped you to realize the importance of investing and provisioning for remote learning when necessary. And of course, COVID-19 has accelerated that process. It was quite impressive to hear from you the investments you've made, about $10 million in upgrading your IT infrastructure. And you shared with us the systems that you have at your university, including, of course, the UP Connect and your learning management system, Blackboard Collaborative, which, by the way, we also use at my university, and that you were able to aggregate all teaching resources, and you were able to complement that with data packages. Again, very impressive that 15,000 students were provided access to these data packages. Of course, some may not have needed them, but those who did obviously made use of those. And that you delayed, again, I found that very impressive. You delayed the reopening to ensure that students who had no access were provided with access, and noted that you were able to get 2,000 laptops distributed under a loan scheme to those students who did not have access, based on the principle that no student should be left behind. And again, the data you gave, that when you studied the online instruction, 26,304 students were able to take courses in 344 live synchronous sessions. So the point you were making, I think it's absolutely correct, and I think all of us need to be thinking about it, that the future will be one that combines face-to-face for the reasons that you explained. Contact teaching is social, and is socializing, has a social and socializing effect that are critical for the intellectual and personal development of young people. But that some programs will have to move to online, and you give the example of executive MBA programs, and in which people may learn remotely, but that occasionally it does make sense to bring them to meet with each other. And you spent time talking about, of course, access issues, in which you discussed what I said earlier about making sure that no students are left behind, and how you have worked very hard to link up with philanthropists for support. You noted one philanthropist giving you 300 million rands. I hope philanthropists in the other countries that are represented on this session are hearing this. We need support from our own local philanthropists, just as we may get support from other philanthropists from abroad. And then, of course, you also noted that you've been able to deal with the issue of international students, the issue of assessment, that the teaching and learning system that you have has fairly sophisticated instruments to ensure that that is done. And again, you gave an impressive figure that 96% of your students had prior COVID online presence in various ways. That made the transition a lot smoother than it would have been otherwise. And I think your conclusion was again, is something that all of us can agree on, that we have to pay attention to ensuring that we collaborate in terms of developing common resources, and where possible common courses, and also where possible where we can teach together. That partnerships among ourselves as universities, with government, with the private sector, with international organizations, with philanthropists, are extremely important in strengthening the electronic infrastructure and other infrastructures that our universities need in our core mission of teaching and learning, research, public service and engagement, innovation, and so on. And I think you left us with a very wonderful metaphor, that not only should we believe in no student left behind, but no institution left behind. That the new normal will need academic institutions to become active agents in its creation by facing the challenges and seizing the opportunities. As a historian, I agree with you that technology in itself can be quite neutral. It can have very positive impact, but it can also have very negative impact. Whether it's going to be positive or negative depends on human agency. It depends on our institutional agency. And I think we should use these technologies to ensure that our core mission of teaching and learning for young people, as well as the other areas of our mission in terms of research, knowledge production, community engagement, public service, all those are being used, being promoted by using technology judiciously, responsibly, and with integrity. So once again, thank you for your presentation. And I wish to thank all three presenters for sharing with us the experiences of their individual universities, but also sharing with us their general thoughts on what this means for us as a sector, and what it means for us as a world, and for us as human beings. With that, I would like now to open the session for question and answer. Before we had this session, we had already received a number of questions. So what I'll do is to combine the questions that are being asked now in the Q&A button, as well as the ones that we had before. And I will start with some of those questions that we received before, and they are grouped into 7 key areas that even the new questions seem to fall under. One set of questions have to do with infrastructure and access, which has been addressed quite significantly, but there are elements of that that I would like to pursue. Equity, quality of teaching and learning and assessment, opportunities for collaboration, faculty and staff workload, student and staff mobility, and preparations for the future. So in terms of the first one, infrastructure and access, and I'll begin with you, Professor Kupe. At what extent have you utilized, or do you think you can utilize low technology options in view of the lack of network coverage in some parts of your catchment area?
No, thank you for that. We went a long way towards that in trying to use broadcast channels. So we actually negotiated with the MultiChoice. MultiChoice Africa is a well-known provider of digital services. They gave us a channel, and what we needed to do was actually to produce content for it. I must say, for the moment, we are not able to use it because, again, because of the suddenness of this event, of fine-tuning our content for online and developing broadcast content, we did not have the capacity and the time. And also, and this point is very important, is that we should, the one thing that is going to discredit online or low technology options is if we put in material of no quality online or on broadcast, that will undermine the educational value. But we're now thinking about when the time comes, we're actually going to reserve those broadcast channels and use them. I also spearheaded for the whole sector of 26 universities a discussion with the South African Broadcasting Corporation, which is the public broadcast, to see whether they couldn't actually allocate us time on the broadcast channels to teach, especially, not every course, obviously, those common courses, say for first-year students in mathematics, for example. There are so common courses that a student in physics, chemistry, even medicine have to take. I thought that we could usefully pilot that. But I mean, the South African Broadcasting Corporation was willing, but it has its own financial constraints, so that was not possible. And again, the time factor of developing. That is why I'm pushing very much that going forward, we must develop common courses and common coursework for open education resources that can easily be plugged into those. Because the one medium, as you know, in Africa that reaches almost all Africans in whatever corner of a country, in the remotest rural villages, is radio. And also followed by in some instances, television. Those are still powerful mediums that we could use. One constraint, of course, with the SABC also is that the continent has been slow, including the SABC, in taking the route from analog broadcasting to digital broadcasting. With analog broadcasting, simply, you have fewer channels. With digital migration, you have multiple. So SABC, for example, on TV, has 4 channels. It could have 33. A student I recently supervised as a PhD. In that PhD, we explored the multiple potential of the SABC at 33 channels. We could reserve 10 channels for education, for high school, for the primary schools, for universities, and so on and so forth. So right now, the low technology option we're using is basically sending down hard copy materials or flash drives, if you like. That is useful in our context, given the technological development we are. But there are huge opportunities going forward. Do digital migration, use broadcast, and there's a long tradition of using broadcast by the likes of the Open University in the UK and other such leading providers of distance education.
Thank you very much. So tied to that, another a question that is on the Q&A in this meeting for Professor Makoe is the question is, how do you see value of support services like student health and wellness programs in the distance learning space?
Thank you very much for the question, and I just want to tag in very quickly on Prof. Kupe's response on the structures, and this is what I mentioned in my presentation, that infrastructure is very critical when we want to do anything, especially in this era. And Unisa have done, we have students all over the world, and that with different types of technologies that we use, we shouldn't look at one technology. You should use different types of technologies in order to access students. One of the courses that every first-year student should take, it's an online course. All different students have to go and do a fully online course, and that fully online course, it's an offline and online course where material is in the USB. When a student registers, gets the USB, and then they can work offline, and then they also only go online when they upload information and when they work in the material. So there are a lot of possibilities, and mobile learning is one of the things that are very critical and many people in the continent have access to. But talking about student support, our students mainly students in distance education, they study on their own, and therefore the support must be integrated into the program itself. It is not separate, it's not a separate entity. It is integrated within the program itself. They have to be supported cognitively within the study material. They have to be supported emotionally. They also have to be supported administratively. So all these different types of support are integrated within the learning material so that it reminds them that they are students. And remember, distance education has always attracted, open distance learning has always attracted students who are already working adults. And those have major issues. They have to negotiate space with a whole lot of things. And I mentioned the program that I'm working on. One of the ways of negotiating space at a distance is to make them part of a community. And we did that by using WhatsApp groups. It's a study group that makes them become part of the community, that assist them with the motivation that you're talking about, that assist them with the wellness. All the issues that are discussed within that platform is also helpful for the students. So support is absolutely critical in that regard. And they don't need, and we found that there's not a space that we allocated space. Support can happen anywhere, especially with the technology that is available everywhere.
The next question I'm going to ask President Stanley, from some of the questions we received before. MSU is noted for its global collaborations. And the question is, to what extent is your university participating in online, in open educational resources development? And is your university willing to share academic resources that you develop, to share them freely, especially if they are developed using public funding from the US?
So this is obviously, I think, something we've been really leading to, which is this idea, again, of sharing not only best practices, but resources, essentially, that can make a difference. And I think MSU is doing this already. Our College of Education is the #1 ranked college of education in the world, at least in the current ranking. So it's an extraordinary asset for the university. And one of the things they've been doing is really finding ways to share their knowledge about things like online learning. So one of the most popular MOOCs that's been created has been a very short MOOC created by our College of Education on how to do K-12 teaching online. It's relatively brief. It's about 15 to 20 minutes for teachers, but it's had thousands and thousands of views as the US has moved to online teaching around the country, and people have tried K-12. That's a whole different set of challenges. I can't imagine. It's difficult enough for people who will stay in their seats to think about online, who can stay focused, but doing that across K-12 is even more challenging. But I think this is the kind of thing we're willing to do. We have a radio and television station that we do, a public radio and television station. We've used that again to provide educational content for K-12, at least, again, around the Michigan area, again, as part of sharing our resources, what we have. So I think, there's been efforts around the US, things like Coursera and others, to develop consortia that do share online, courses. I think it's a little more challenging because I agree with actually Professor Kupe that I think that the hybrid is really the better solution. The purely online has some advantages, the MOOCs have some advantages, but I do believe the hybrid is better. So I do think having that kind of in-person context for some courses, I think makes a difference. So I think finding ways to share that may be a little more difficult rather, but I think providing the course resources that what would be expected from the in-person components might make that kind of sharing possible as well. There's certain courses I believe can be done fully online and very effectively. I think statistics courses, for example, with AI that had AI, so you can again correct people as they go, work quite well online. But there's other courses I think are more difficult to do in anything but a hybrid or purely in person. So I think just for time reasons, I'll stop my answer there. But again, this has been a wonderful discussion from my point of view, and I'm learning a lot, not just from this, but from the chat that's going on as well, which is one advantage of these kind of Zoom meetings is we can have a greater exchange of ideas than just from us talking. We can actually look at the chat as well. And if I don't get the chance, Professor Zeleza, you've done a remarkable job moderating this and capturing everybody's comments. I'm amazed with how fast I talk that you were able to capture my stuff, but I'm very impressed by that. And again, by my comments and my colleagues, and I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. I have 3 more questions in the interest of time. One is, we've been talking about disparities and inequalities and so on, and we've tended to focus on disparities in terms of income, or in the case of the US, also in terms of race and ethnicity and so on. The group that we have not talked about are students with disability. To what extent are your universities dealing with this whole question of students with disability, living with disability, in terms of learning using these online platforms? And I will ask each one of you just to give a very brief answer, starting with Professor Makoe, and then we go to Professor Kupe and Professor Stanley.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And again, maybe our point is that the advantage of being in an open distance learning space is that many students who are also people with disabilities tend to register with us, because there's not too many things that they need they don't have to travel to campus, they don't have to have someone to assist them when they are on campus and all that. So we have a support department that deals with them, and also they are integrated within the structure. And one other thing that we need to do as we develop our courses from the instructional design mode is that we need to develop study material for the lowest denominator. Because any other person, because what we tend to do in education, we develop for one size fits all, and for the middle people who can be able to participate. But if you develop for the lowest denominator, even those that are struggling, you are able to pick them up, and it's part of equity to pick them up to get to the level at which you can get to. So far at our university, we have different systems. Even with the examination, people with disabilities have different ways of the way we examine them. We do it differently than any other student. Because again, people with disabilities is not only those who registered right at the beginning and they were disabled when they were registering. It can happen to anyone in the middle of your career, in the middle of your school life. And then all of a sudden you are in a car accident and you are disabled and you need to be supported accordingly. So again, universities must open their support structures in that space. That's why I'm saying with us, in terms of access, it has been one of the things that we tend to attract people who are marginalized, people who wouldn't have access to higher education if they are not in those spaces.
Professor Kupe, any additional
in our
thoughts?
case, we quickly realized at the beginning that if we were speaking about no student left behind, that was a category that could be left behind. In our case, slightly different, because most of our disabled students often are in residence as well, because it's much easier for us. But now they were gone precisely because of the pandemic closures and so on. So what we did was also we have a disability unit and a counseling unit. So the 2 units working together with the academic departments and schools, they have found ways to actually support them through their learning. Some of it might include telephone tutoring and all of those, and materials that can be produced for them to be able to access as if they were in campus. In fact, one of the things we want is one category of student we want to come back to campus since we are allowed to bring other students. They are, frankly, for a contact university like ours, better in our space where we often have specialist laboratories, equipment, and support personnel to enable them to actually have a full educational experience.
Thank you. Yes.
I'll be very quick and give a practical example. As we transitioned to remotely and sent people home, we had a lot of students who lost employment and needed work. But we also needed people who could, again, render some of our courses more accessible. So we employed those students in captioning courses for the hearing impaired, as well as narrating courses and narrating charts and so on for the visually impaired to improve the quality of the work we were doing. So it was a practical way to get students employed in a way that made a difference and helped helped individuals with disability in at least those two areas.
My last but one question has to do with faculty staff workload, which all of us are facing in our institutions. How does the move to provide remote courses and online programming impacting faculty workloads on your campuses? Many faculty members are already overloaded, and how will how will this change, impacting them as they take on, training in new ways of teaching and learning, and the other things that, of course, faculty are supposed to do, including research and engagement and so on. So how are you dealing with those issues of faculty workload and faculty morale and faculty engagement? Let's start with President Stanley, and then we'll move to Professor Makoe.
This has been a really challenging issue.
And VC Kupe, yes.
It's been a really challenging issue for us, and of course it's been complicated by the fact that many of our faculty are working from home as well and may have children they're having to care for at the same time they're doing their faculty duties, because with the schools closing and daycares closing in the state, that's creating even more an issue. So we've tried to do a couple things. We've tried again to set up support services for faculty. The faculty themselves have been very good at setting up online chat sessions so they can decompress after courses, so they can have coffee breaks kind of that they schedule themselves through Teams or Zooms or the other things we're using to help provide moral support during this time. And we're trying to be very understanding about things like the tenure clock. So we've already added a year to the tenure clock for faculty who are on the tenure track, so they don't have to worry about coming up too soon. We have suspended their evaluations for the courses they had to teach online. Those are optional, whether they want those included or not in their portfolio, because for many, as I've talked about before, it was the first time they ever went online, and we wanted to make sure they were protected. So these are some of the things we're doing to help what we realize is a very stressful time for them, and I'll stop there.
Professor Makoe?
Thank you very much. I think the issue of staff workload is real. And it's becoming, and it was even real before the COVID-19, because faculty were expected to do a whole lot more with very little, and with things that they were not trained to do. In a study that I conducted about workload and staff workload, what I found is that we are running a parallel system. We are running a system that we always had, and then at the same time, we add a layer of a new way of doing things. Online comes in, it's another layer. Other things come in, it's another layer. And then we have not thought of a way of not separating the issues, but how do we integrate the two so that it becomes one system that supports you as a lecturer in order to be able to say, this is what I need to do. And this is, and the other thing also, managerialism that got into universities has taken a lot of time from academics. Then we deal with reports all the time, we deal with all these other things, and then we don't get to the core function that I need to get into in terms of teaching and learning and thinking about how do I teach efficiently, given all the added things that comes to my plate. And also not even giving people time to develop professionally, to develop these new skills of maybe instructional designing or how to teach in an online space. And what does it mean to teach in an online space? We expect people to move in with whatever that they have been doing that they are familiar with into another space that they're not familiar with, and that makes them very uncomfortable. So, and then the third thing is also having research as one of the core components of our promotion. Our promotion is based on research. And then at the same time, you're expected to teach, and you're expected to be innovative, you're expected to support students. So all those things, when they come together, you find that others just choose to do research and leave out other things, and others focus on this. And I think that the culprits here are the junior staff members, because we tend to give them anything that we don't like. Thank you.
Professor Kupe?
So I can say that definitely increases the workload. And I can say also, I wouldn't say we're doing things that integrate long-term right now. We are watching this space. But what we also have discovered at the University of Pretoria is that even our philosophical attitude towards embracing the hybrid, embedded in that is teaching staff how to actually teach in the hybrid mode. So for staff, for example, who took to this like a duck to water, fish to water, they might not find that it's too onerous. I say it's 96% of our undergraduate modules are already online. So it's not like reinventing the wheel, doing it right away. But having to do it as not a hybrid, but as a single mode, definitely changes the game stakes in terms of the time allocation and time you could use to do other things. That is why at University of Pretoria, we are hiring more tutors as we speak and faculty student advisors. A number of philanthropic companies we work with have actually approached us to say, what do you need? If you look at the proposals I'm sending out these days, I'm asking for more support for teaching assistants, tutors, and other people that can take the load away from the academic staff, or the faculty, so that they can focus on teaching. So, but I think that if we agree that hybrid teaching and learning is the future, we now have to rethink workload and rethink the model of workload and how it actually works. It will get better as everybody adopts that mode. The longer we delay doing that and do it as an emergency remote teaching and learning, will compound the issues and simply undermine long-term development of faculty, long-term development of the academy.
My last question, and it's very brief, only one person who wants to address it can do so. And that is, while it's obviously desirable that no institution be left behind, the reality is that this COVID-19 crisis is affecting different universities differently in different countries. And today I was reading this morning in the New York Times a story that some universities in the US may not survive. And that could be true in other parts of the world as well. What's your crystal ball telling you in terms of survival of some of us in this new, brave post-COVID-19 world?
If I can hazard an answer is
yes.
That just look at an analogy in the economic sphere. When major companies that are vital to a country's economic prospects, employment, and so on, the government steps in, stimulus packages and other financial incentives, if you like. If you remember, in the 2018 global financial crisis, US government stepped in to save the banks and the motor companies. And under COVID, many governments have had stimulus packages for various sectors of the economy. I think it's totally unwise to leave out the education sector. Because where do economists come from? Where do all of these people that produce innovations come from? From research, knowledge, and development in universities. Universities globally need a massive stimulus, rescue and stimulus package, which does not mean you save every institution. Some institutions might have had fatal flaws, COVID or no COVID. But to fail to save the education sector will sink the nation and sink the global economy and sink societies across the world.
I agree with everything Professor Kupe said, that I think universities do need support. We're absolutely vital to the economy. But in the United States, as you implied, Professor Zeleza, there are some campuses that already were in trouble in the current situation. And I am concerned that some of these, particularly smaller private institutions, may end up ending as a result of this.
With that, I would like to bring the session to close. Once again, I wish to thank our three presenters. You will agree with me, they shared with us very important insights, not only as to what is going on in their own institutions, but also their general thoughts about the impact, including the very last comment on higher education as an important part of our economies, our societies, and therefore they should not be left behind. It's not doing them a favor. It is actually doing society itself a favor by maintaining the institutions that produce human capital and produce the kind of research that leads to advances that our societies have experienced for a very, very long time. With that, I want to ask the organizers from AAP if any of them has the last word. But thank you, and I want to thank also the participants and their questions. Obviously, we could spend hours talking about this. Fortunately, we have 3 more sessions that will address other issues that could not be addressed fully in this particular forum.
Thank you, Professor
Amy
Zeleza.
or Justin?
Yes, thank you, Professor Zeleza. My job is just to thank all of the presenters. This was an excellent discussion. I know I learned a lot, and I see in the chats that that those who joined us also got a lot out of the session. So we really appreciate your time that you spent with us today and your expertise and thoughts that you shared. I also wanted to alert those who are registered participants here that we have, as Professor Zeleza mentioned, 3 more dialogues coming up. The next one will be in 2 weeks, and it is going to be on the economic, food security, and livelihood impacts of COVID-19 in Africa, and lessons learned and policy responses. We'll have David Shirley from Michigan State University, Mamsamba Mbai from University Sheikh Anta Diop in Dakar, Senegal, and Godfrey Bahigwa from the Africa Union. Those are the 3 presenters. So we really look forward to that discussion, and we invite you to register and participate in that. So with that, I'll thank everyone for presenting again, and on behalf of AAP, we're very thankful that all of you have joined us today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, AAP. Thank you, President Stanley.
Thank you. Thank you, VC Kupe and DVC Makoe. Thank you very much. And President Stanley.
Thank you, Prof. Zeleza.
Look, I hope at some point in time we can see each other in person. That would be nice.
Yes,
We'll look forward to that.
Oh, we are going to have that.
Yeah. Thank you.
It will be at the University of Pretoria Future Africa Institute in 2020.
Oh, that's all right.
No, that's fine. That would be great.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.